presentations. Thank you for all being here. Again, today we have 3 presenters, the first of which is going to be Chris Anderson. So I'm going to let Chris take this away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Anderson. Yes, Chair. Thank you. I'm doing graph theory-based fingerprint matching. Yes, I am talking about physical fingerprints, not the computer science fingerprints. And graph theory, no, I'm not talking about algebraic graphs, and we'll see in a second. Okay, so here is my, if it's gonna change. Here's my table of contents. We have a lot to go through. Hopefully I will make it in time. But first, I'm going to be doing an introduction, just talking about why I chose to do this project, what are my inspirations. And then I'm going to be talking about graph encoding, which is how can I transcribe a physical fingerprint into a mathematical graph. And then the third step is graph reduction, because obviously fingerprints have a lot of details and the graphs tend to be really complicated, so we need to reduce the size and the complexity of the graphs. And then number 4, I'm going to be talking about the hardware encoding aspects of the project, which is mainly automating the process of like image processing and using Python to create like a graph library. And then the 5th step is graph matching, which is how we can match fingerprints based on their graphical representations. And then I'm just going to talk about a quick conclusion. This is a lot and it's very intimidating, but it's okay because I don't know what I'm doing either. You get a bonus if you can count how many fingerprints are in this presentation. There has been 5 so far. Okay, keep that in mind. Yeah, no, this counts. Like every slide counts. So every slide has different fingerprints.
Is this the 5th one? This
is the 5th one. You got it, Master. I believe in you. Okay, introduction. So why am I doing this presentation? I like crime shows. It is ontologically impossible for me to have a healthy relationship with a crime show, and crime shows have a lot of fingerprints. I also like computer engineering and cybersecurity, so I thought to myself, what is an excuse for me to merge all of those interests? And this is what I came up with. Obviously, though, there are also real-world applications. This is Brandon Mayfield. This is the only picture I could find of him. Sorry, it's like really up close and personal. But he was wrongfully arrested in 2004 for a series of train bombings in Madrid, Spain. That arrest was based on a partial fingerprint matching, which the FBI at the time said was 100% no doubt identical to Brandon Mayfield's fingerprints. It is also notable that after the FBI started investigating him, Brandon Mayfield is a Muslim and he is married to an Egyptian immigrant, and after the FBI known of that, they published themselves that there was religious bias in it, so they were more likely to convict him because of that religious bias. This is not my own observation. This is officially published in the FBI report that's claiming that they had religious bias. Now obviously I cannot solve these social injustices, and this is not what my project is about today. However, I can try to work towards reducing the plausible deniability in fingerprinting technology so it does not enable these social issues further. And that's really the real-world applications, because right now, fingerprint science is not standardized. It's not really, there's not a lot of oversight, and we can work to make this a better technology. Okay, now we're gonna really get into it. I only have 15 minutes. Please don't work. Some background. What is a graph? Well, over here, as you can see the bubbles and the lines, that's a mathematical graph. For those of you in computer science, I'm looking at you, Sebastian. You may know this as a tree. They're the same thing. Basically, you have nodes, which are little vertices, and then you have edges that connect the graphs. And that's all a graph is in higher math. It's just, we have connected nodes. On the right-hand side over here, it's a matrix. A matrix is literally just a 2D thing of numbers. We have rows and columns of numbers. And oftentimes in mathematics, a matrix is used to represent a graph numerically, because computers can't process shapes, they process numbers. And so it's just, and I'll get into this later when I actually talk about my algorithm, which is now. Here is how I transcribe a fingerprint into a mathematical graph. So if you look at your fingerprint right now, you may not see much. You'll see that there is like a circle and there's a bunch of like whorls that encase the circle. However, you may not know that there are actually hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of details. So here's a quick walkthrough. This is really interesting because it turns out that there is no standardized science to say what details are fingerprints or how these details are generated. So this is actually my own curated list based on other research papers I've found and other like observational data. However, this is not standardized, so I'm not a fingerprint scientist. Yeah, I tried my best though. So we have salient features, which are the bigger features. This is like, so for example, if we look at a whorl, here's a plain whorl. If you look at your fingerprint, that's what you're most likely going to see first. Right in the middle, you're going to have a circle and you're going to have a bunch of ridges like swirling around it. That's most likely a plain whorl. Or at the center, you may have a loop. And then we also have arch, tinted arch. You can see that there's a bunch of classifications. But we also have smaller details, and these you're probably not going to see with your visible eye. However, these are details that exist between ridges. For example, we have a bifurcation right there, which is basically when a ridge is split into two, and you can see there's a bunch of different types of details. So these are all the details that I use in fingerprint theory. So, in order to talk about my algorithm, obviously a real fingerprint would be way too complicated. So I'm using a hand-drawn, way simpler fingerprint to demonstrate how this algorithm really works. So as you can see, this is a very simple fingerprint. In your actual fingerprint, there are dozens, if not hundreds of ridges, and this one has like 10. So we have three main salient features. We have the plain arch section at the top. We have a plain whorl section in the middle. We have a short unclassified ridge. And then we have a tinted arch facing down at the bottom. And within each of those salient sections, we have different details. For example, in the plain arch, we have a dot, which is just when a dot floats between two ridges. We also have a bifurcation, which is a split. So every section will have their own details. So that's how we're going to treat this. Because when we look at an overall fingerprint at one, it can get really overwhelming and really complicated to analyze. So we're first going to split a fingerprint into its main salient features, and then we're going to construct a graph of all the minutiae, of all the details within those salient features. And that is essentially what this is. This looks really weird, and it would take a lot of background to explain exactly what I'm doing here. However, as you can see, I did construct a graph for the different sections. So we have the plain arch graph, which corresponds to the plain arch section over there. We have the plain whorl, which corresponds there, and we have the tinted arch, and so on. And you may be wondering, okay, how are you actually constructing these graphs? Well, for those of you who are actually familiar with matrices, all of the matrices I'm showing you is meant to be an adjacency matrix. I forgot to add like 2 columns for all of them. Just imagine that they are a perfectly square adjacency matrix. However, I'm basically constructing an adjacency matrix saying, hey, is this edge connected to a detail? For example, if we look at the plain arch, we can see that edge 3, if you look at the edge labeled number 3 in there in the plain arch, we can see that it's actually connected to a bifurcation. And so I put in a 1 in the adjacency matrix saying, hey, this edge is connected to a bifurcation, and I do this for every detail. And a dot is going to be connected to 2 edges because it sits in between 2 edges. And then I just construct the visual graph from the adjacency matrix from there. Okay, so now that we have all the salient features adjacency matrix, you may be like, okay, but the salient features are also relative to each other, right? As you can see, the plain arch is not connected to the tinted arch, right? The plain arch is connected to the plain whorl, and the plain whorl is connected to unclassified, and then the unclassified is connected to the tinted arch. So we also need to construct a visual graph showing the relationship between the main salient sections, because it's not just about the details, which is that. It's the same thing as before. I'm using a simple adjacency matrix. And then as you can see, this one is a little bit more easier to understand. The plain arch is connected to the plain whorl, which is demonstrated right here by 2 nodes that are connected. The plain whorl is connected to the unclassified, which is demonstrated by the nodes connected. Okay. Now we have that. Now I'm literally just going to stick the 2 components together. We have the previous salient sections graphs, and then we have how those graphs are connected to each other. So I'm just going to stitch them all together, which is going to look like a chain, like that. And that's the matrix for that graph. And the matrix does not have zeros because that would be a lot of zeros to write. And I did not want to write that many zeros. But as you can see, I do have these letter abbreviations for details. We have an enclosure, we have a bridge, a dot, a bifurcation, and then all the numbers just represent, like sequentially top to down, what the order of the edges are. Okay, and this, remember that this is for a super simple fingerprint, right? This only has like maybe 12 edges in total. Your actual fingerprint has like hundreds, dozens, like a lot of edges and a lot of details. And if this simple fingerprint already creates a graph with this many nodes, it's going to be really complicated, and I don't have an actual picture of a graph that represents a real fingerprint, but trust me, it's huge. Like I had one where it's like 500 nodes. So we need an algorithm to reduce the graph. And this is my third section, graph reduction. Okay, I want to first give credit where credit is due. This specific paper by John L. Pfalz, I want to say, from the Computer Science Department of University of Virginia. This paper has been my holy grail. I have understood it with the help of alumni Elsa Frankel a lot. And this is kind of the basis for my graph reduction algorithm. In this paper, if you're really into it, I can talk to you about it later, but it uses things like neighborhoods and closure to create an iterative algorithm that reduces every graph into its irreducible spline. I'm not going to be explaining that in high mathematical terms. I'm just going to be providing a really intuitive algorithm. Okay. So here is my graph reduction algorithm. I'm not going to read through all the steps because I'm not sure that anyone is even super interested in all the specifics. However, what you need to know is that, remember how there are vertices or nodes that represent every detail in the fingerprint and they're connected to a bunch of numbered edges? What I'm basically presuming is saying, hey, okay, let me reconstruct a graph where it's just the details. So I'm just creating another graph where it's just these 4 nodes that represent the minutiae in the fingerprint. And then I'm saying, how many ridges is between this detail and this other detail? And then that's how many edges that are going to connect these nodes. Basically, what I'm preserving here is the connectivity of all the details, of all the minutiae relative to the entire fingerprint, while also getting rid of all the unnecessary ridge nodes. So it reduces the graph by a lot. That's essentially what the algorithm is. There's a lot of mathematical work behind it. I will be writing a 40-page long paper. Parker, you're going to be reading that. I will force you to. But essentially, after you reduce the graph, that's what the previous stitch graph looks like. It's 4 nodes now, and that's it. And that's the degree sequence, if any of you guys like that. Okay, so this is all theoretical, however, and now we have to be okay, well, this is all theoretical. I need to actually code this, right? I have to have an actual fingerprint sensor, and I have to be able to transcribe this into all of this process. How do I actually practically implement this? Which comes to hardware. I don't have much time left, so I'm just going to be quickly walking this through. I wasn't planning on diving into detail anyway. So we have main layers. We have a physical fingerprint reader. You put it on the fingerprint reader, it takes down it takes a picture, a PNG of your fingerprint. We put that into an Arduino interface. If you don't know what an Arduino is, it's a small computer. And that's what we're connecting the fingerprint reader to. And then I put that into a Python library for image processing. What I'm doing here is I'm getting rid of the background, I'm upping the contrast, I'm sharpening the image, I'm binarizing image. I'm basically just doing a bunch of stuff to the PNG to make it processable. And then we put it into NIST software. NIST stands for, I think, National Institute Standards for Technology, but they have biometric software available to process and extract all the details. And then I coded the algorithm for graph encoding and graph reduction in Python, and I put the processed image back into that. And then I can put the graph that represents the fingerprint into the database. Long process here. This is probably the part that took me the longest in the process. So here, I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough of what this actually looks like. Okay, fingerprint reader, the blue thing, the blue glowing circle, that's a capacitive fingerprint reader. It doesn't work by actual photonic imaging. It works by it sends a little pulse to your finger, and then because your finger is conductive, it can see an electrical map of where your ridges are. It's pretty cool. That's what your phone and laptop uses if your laptop has a fingerprint thing. The blue breadboard, the blue thing on the bottom, that's an Arduino. That's the microcomputer. Okay, so fingerprint reader to Arduino interface. This is the Arduino library that I used. And then after that, once I get a bunch of images, as you can see over here, I put it into the Python image processing where I just do a bunch of contrast stuff. I get rid of the background. And then after that, this is my biggest roadblock in the project because all the biometric software that analyzes fingerprints, software that can recognize where details are and what the features of fingerprint are not publicly available. And the only public available thing I could find was from this random federal government thing in 1995 written in assembly, and the only support for it is a stack thread from 11 years ago. So that was not super successful. I tried to contact private companies. I think I even emailed the Federal Bureau at one point, and I'm not a private company, and they only give out software to private companies. So unfortunately, this part of the project I could not achieve. If I had more time and more resources, I probably would have gotten my hands on some actual good fingerprint and analysis software. But let's just imagine that I did. They go from the software and then to Python graph encoding and reduction. So here is a hash map that actually represents the graph of the fingerprint that I use. And then I'm literally just like, hey, and then over here is the algorithm for reducing the graph. Lastly, I'm storing it in a database. If you don't know what that is up there, that is a Raspberry Pi. I basically set up this thing where it says, hey, every time I scan a fingerprint, it automatically sends a message to the Raspberry Pi, which automatically stores it in an SQL database. So, lastly, we have the graph matching. Again, credit where credit is due. These two papers, Holy Grail, the graph matching does not have a very simple visual explanation. All I can say is it has to do with matrix analysis. If you're into that, it's like where I'm analyzing the eigenvalues of all the adjacency matrices that represent the fingerprint graphs, and I'm using those values to compare how similar graphs are. This part is not as interesting, and it's actually not really the focus of my project, so I'm just kind of quickly gliding through it. But anyways, last part is conclusions. Here we have the time complexity and the space complexity of this algorithm. Sebastian, you should know what that means if you're planning on majoring in computer science. Got my eyes on you. But basically, this means, I think this is pretty good because it's not exponential, not a polynomial, it's linear, which means it doesn't take a lot of time to do and it doesn't take a lot of space to do. And so I think my algorithm overall is pretty good. This is the first time I think someone has done a really visual approach to fingerprint transcribing. All pre-existing fingerprint transcribing technologies rely on like just pure numerical or cryptographic analysis. And so yeah, that is my fingerprinting algorithm here. And I don't have an actual big database of fingerprints to look at, but so I can't tell you actually how effective it is, but if I did, I probably would. Okay. Here are my sources used. And here's the last slide. So if you were counting the number of fingerprints, here's the last slide. Are there any questions? I did go slightly over time. Yes?
I heard you like reduce the graph into just like the minuses or like the small details.
Yeah.
And then how well they connect. Like, does that get rid of the data about like what the big shapes are on like the ridges or the
No.
ridges?
How do I like go back to? Well, no, it doesn't because. Okay, if you look at, it doesn't get rid of the data for where the big features actually are because the graph of where the details are in relative position to where the big features actually are. Like I'm basically creating two graphs. One is like the graph of all the big features, how they are connected to each other, and then every node in this graph technically represents another graph that represents all the details within that section. So it's preserving the connectivity of the big sections while also looking at what every detail is in that section. Does that make sense? A little bit? Yep.
Is there a reason you didn't perform like Fourier analysis?
I wanted to. I really wanted to, and I procrastinated, and I ran out of time. That's my honest answer. Oh, it's transcribing. Okay. So yeah, I did look into it. I do have notes on Fourier analysis. I haven't even learned it yet. I'm in Miss Hill's calculus class. So yeah, that's my answer. Yep.
Would you say like the biggest selling point of your new system is like the efficiency, or is it the accuracy, or is it both?
Definitely accuracy, because there's a lot of available optimization for how efficient this algorithm can be that I did not look into because I just didn't. The main selling point of this is that this is more accurate than a lot of pre-existing fingerprint matching algorithms because it looks at a lot more data. It looks at where the details are in relative to each other, whereas a lot of other fingerprint algorithms, they just like write down like what the details are. But this algorithm actually looks at like how the details are related to each other, like relatively in their position. So I'd say that's a pretty good selling point. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Were there 52?
What?
Were there 52 things?
There were more than 52.
I got 62.
62?
73.
73? Are there any other guesses?
78.
78? Mr. Mela, what do you think?
I was paying attention to details.
So the answer was 71. So whoever answered 73 was the closest.
Yay!
Are there any other questions for Chris? Okay, thank you.
Do I just...
Yeah, you just disconnect.
Okay, I just...
Does it work?
5 minutes better than what you did. Still 5 minutes over time.
Wait, what were you?
I was 20.
Okay, that's fine. 35. Yeah. You got this, Jackson.
Okay, and Jackson will be our next presenter.
Alright, so this is my project on why robotic limbs don't have to be so robotic. Alright, so to start, here's what we're going to be going over today. We're going to be going over my inspiration for this project, some of the background information and technology that went into it. We're going to look at my design and then future adaptations and challenges that I face. And then we're going to have some time for questions. Alright, so to start, we're going to start with my inspiration. So my inspiration started this summer when I was watching the 2024 Olympics in Paris. This guy here, his name is Hunter Woodall. He's a Paralympic athlete for the United States, and he won gold in the 400 meter this summer. As you can see, he does not have any legs, and he's lived without legs for almost all of his life. So as I was watching that, it made me think about prosthetic limbs and, you know, what the cost of them is. So I did some Googling, and it was about $10,000 for like a basic prosthetic leg or prosthetic arm. And then for a leg, it can be like $70,000 for a really good one. And for an arm, it could be all the way up to $100,000. And that is without insurance, but it's still a lot of money. So that led me to my goal of I wanted to design a joint that effectively mimics the functions of human joints while being affordable to consumers. Because I wanted to make this accessible to people who are maybe low income or just can't spend $100,000 for an arm. So some of the background information that I used. So one of the main technologies that I focused on was the Hazel actuator, which is a design from the University of Colorado Boulder. And I'm going to dive into that in a sec about what that really means. But basically, it's just a soft tissue artificial muscle. And the thing that really drew me to it was its low production cost. So when mass produced, it can be produced at 10 cents a unit, which is really good. And so what I'm actually trying to make is a hinge joint, which means there's a bunch of different types of joints in the human body. And what I'm focusing on is just a joint that can go up, down, side, side. So just two directions instead of like something that can go in a circle or whatever. I also want to do soft tissue so that it can mimic human movement. Because you think about a robot, it's like super robotic, just like quick movements in one direction. But I wanted to make that more organic and sort of flow like a human would. So Hazel Actuator stands for Hydraulically Amplified Self-Healing Electrostatic Actuator. And for those of you who don't know, an actuator is just a device that causes a machine or another device to operate. So how this actually works is, this is sort of like a cross-cut of it, of like a half. So I'll show you in a second what it would more resemble. So you have a flexible polymer pouch, which is something like a plastic wrap that you would have on like a sandwich or something like that. So it's flexible, but it would be a little bit thicker so that it would be stronger. On either side of that is an electrode. So that's just something that will act sort of like a electromagnet. So when energy is pumped into it, it'll close together, which we'll see in a sec. And then what's filling the polymer pouch is a dielectric liquid, which just means a liquid that's not going to like absorb energy. So how it works is on the top, in state 1, in the top right, you can see that it's sort of flat and there's no electricity in it. And then right here, once you pump electricity in, those sort of like the electrodes come together because there's a positive and a negative side. And if you've ever like played with a magnet, positive and negative attract each other and they come together. So that pushes out the dielectric liquid into one area here, which creates pressure. And as you can see from the top to the bottom, that green part gets a little bit taller. So one of the things that helped me visualize this was when I was Googling stuff, trying to figure out what all this meant, I came across a YouTube video where they had a plastic bag filled with water and then 2 little things on each side. So as you can see, this is just like a bag full of water. It's super like floppy. And then when these are pushed together, it becomes super firm and actually pushes up a little bit. And it's, firm. So that acts like a human muscle. And when the more pressure you have, oh, it's leaking. The more pressure you have here, the stronger that muscle actually is. So if you want to pass this around and just try that out so you can feel it, don't pop it. Yeah. All right, so one of the really good resources that I had was Artemis Robotics. So Artemis Robotics is a company that focuses on creating lifelike robotics, which is like exactly what I was trying to do. And they are the ones who mass produce Hazel actuators right now, and they're the ones who do it for 10 cents a unit. They also sell some of the technology that's needed to activate this, which has some really high voltage, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And it was one of the best resources for me for learning how this technology works. And if you're interested in learning about this more, I would go to this website or this their company's website. That's like the best place to learn about it. So this is an example sort of what it would look like. We already have that. So when there's no energy in it, the black part is the electrodes. This is the pouch and then dielectric liquid on the inside. And then we have no energy versus energy in it. So my design will sort of look like a donut with energy in it and sort of just like a pouch without it. So this is an example of them like sort of stacked on top of each other. So this is how I was going to create an actual muscle. So you can see the height difference on them. One is a lot taller than the other. So that's exactly what I was going for. So when mimicking a joint, I was thinking about how a human joint works. So how a human muscle works is, if we take the arm for example, you've got the bicep on top, tricep on the bottom. And your brain sends a small electrical pulse to your muscle, causing it to contract. And then the muscle is connected to your bone or joint with a tendon. So when your bicep contracts, for example, it brings your arm up. When your tricep contracts, brings your arm out. So that's exactly what I was trying to mimic. So here's an example of what it would sort of look like. We have the bicep on top, tricep on bottom, and then those things that look like sort of guitar strings would act like a tendon. You can see there's no donut shape here. That's because I thought it would be a good idea to cover it in sort of like a rubber or maybe like a leather or something like that to protect it from punctures or other things, because if you just have like a plastic bag, very easy to pop. And then this is what it would look like when it's up. And then here's them together. You can see on the top the bicep is flexed, on the bottom the tricep is flexed. So that's very simple, just up, down. Yeah. So why does this tech actually help us? So it mimics organic movement very well. As you can see, very robotic movement right there. So with this technology, it would help robots and prosthetics that use like a battery or something to be more human-like. It also has a very quick response time that I think is actually faster than a human response time. And that helps to mimic human muscles very well. It's also very lightweight, so you don't want to be carrying around something that weighs 200 pounds, so it's very helpful that way. It's also silent, so you're not going to hear like a vroom, vroom, like a robot or whatever. It also has a really long life, so these can go millions of times with energy pumped through and still be good to go. It's also very customizable, so these can be shaped in many, many different ways. I chose to do the donut shape because I thought it would mimic a human muscle very well, but there's also many other types of ways that it can be used. So some challenges that I faced were it needs a lot of voltage, which is why I don't have an example to show you of the full thing, because it was enough voltage to kill me. So that's why I don't have it for you. The technology to mass produce it also we don't have. So it would be very tedious and probably take a really long time. That's why I would like to work with something like Artemis Robotics to help mass produce that so it could actually be effective. I think it would also be cool to connect it to some brain waves. That way it could be implemented into like a prosthetic. So where to go next from this? I'd like to create the muscle requiring a lot less energy. That way it can be safer and a lot easier, which I didn't really go into on this, but I think it would be really, really helpful. I'd also like to implement this into prosthetics because I haven't had any experience with that. So I'd like to work with someone who has a lot more experience with that. I'd also like to create a full limb using these muscles because right now I just had 2 muscles, which isn't actually how a human arm functions. There's tons of muscles, and in your body you have a lot of muscles. So I'd like to try to mimic that. I'd also like to experiment with large machinery or robotics, which I think would be even more dangerous because it would be a lot of energy. But I think it would be really cool to see how that actually works. All right, so does anybody have any questions?
Is the mechanism like a fully on and off thing, or could you like, you know how like our muscles don't have to be fully flexed, fully like relaxed, could it be like halfway on?
Yeah, it can. So the more energy you pump in, the greater the attraction between the 2 electrodes is. So if you pump in less, it's gonna come up less. If you pump in a lot, that also goes into how quick you want it to move. So yeah.
Yeah, in addition to sort of quickness and range of movement, you look at the strength of the joint and sort of what it could possibly lift.
Yeah, so I actually didn't look into that as much because I was more focused on building the thing itself. But there was one resource that I had. It was actually the research paper from the University of Colorado Boulder about the Hazel actuators. And I think it said it could lift like 10 times its own weight. So I thought that was pretty good. And when stacked on top of each other, that seemed really effective to me. Chris?
What material would the exterior of the donuts be made out of? Like the stuff that holds the dielectric fluid, like the donut.
So it would be very similar to like a plastic wrap, like on a sandwich that you'll see in the dining hall or whatever. Obviously, it's not the same kind. It's a little bit more flexible than that, so it can stretch that way. It doesn't pop as easily, but it's not. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Yeah.
When you say there's like the energy put in to like do the movement, is that like some sort of like other mechanism, or is it like somehow linked? Like, would it be able to be linked to someone's like actual like neural activity?
Yeah. So right now, what it is it's like a battery that pumps it in. But what I think would be really cool was linking it to your brain cells. That way, it could like be really, really useful. But I'm not a brain scientist, so I don't know how to do that yet. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talked about how really you could go with tons of different shapes, but you picked the donut shape because you thought it mimicked the muscle. That's what was the rationale for that donut shape, thinking it mimicked the muscle the best?
Yeah. So there's actually 3 different types of Hazel actuators right now. Well, not types, shapes. One of them sort of contracts this way. And when electricity is pumped in, it goes like this, and the donut goes up. And when you look at like the human muscle, when you flex, your muscle goes up. It actually does come in too, but it mostly goes up. So I thought that would be the most effective for mimicking a human joint the best.
Any other questions for Jackson? Thank you.
I need to get this out.
Okay, and our final presenter of the day will be Kay.
So, thank you guys so much for coming here today. I'm Kay Mai, and today I'm here to present my research on the brainwaves. So, in this project, I used a brainwave monitor to visualize and analyze my brain activity through brainwaves. brainwaves under various conditions. And using that data, I will suggest how to create an environment that optimizes your brain activity and also maximizes your productivity for a certain task. So this project all started with a simple question: what if we could visually see our thoughts? And some of you guys might think it is a silly idea, but thanks to the incredible progress in the study of neuroscience over the past few decades, the visualization of thoughts might not sound as ridiculous as before. And in fact, the company named Neuralink, led by Elon Musk, just announced that they successfully implanted a microchip in patients' brain and enabled them to control a mouse cursor by just looking, by thinking and looking at a certain point on the screen without any remarkable side effects. So this kind of news, I think, shows how powerful the neuroscience could be, and also it might even change the way we live in the next few decades. So before talking about brainwaves, I would like to introduce a couple of critical technologies that significantly took place in my project. And the first technology is BMI. BMI is brain-machine interface, and BMI enables the direct communication between the brain and external devices, such as computer and robotic arm. And the second technology is EEG, and EEG is a non-invasive method used to record electrical activity of the brain through electrodes attached to the skull. And as opposed to the chip-in method by Neuralink that I just mentioned, EEG method often utilizes a headband devices that have a few electrodes inside and measure brain activity from outside of the skull. So EEG technology allows us to measure our brainwaves more safely. So some of you guys might be wondering what exactly is brainwaves. So brainwaves refer to electrical impulses in the brain that occur when groups of neurons or brain cells synchronize. And these impulses are measured in frequencies, and brainwaves are typically divided into 5 main categories depending on their frequency. So the highest to lowest is gamma, beta, alpha, beta, and delta. So while gamma and beta waves are associated with focused mental activities like learning, decision making, and intense exercise, alpha and theta waves are prominent when you're meditating in a calm state or just before sleeping. And delta waves have the lowest frequency and are associated with deep dreamless sleep or a period of deep relaxation. And high delta activity is linked with the body healing and regeneration process. So in order to explore how the brain reacts to a certain external factors and which brainwaves are associated with changes in these factors, I use this EEG device, headband device, to measure my brainwave and compare the collected data to see the changes in the brainwaves. So this device has 3 electrodes and analyzes my brainwaves through 10 minutes practice. And in the experiment, I altered brightness and noise and music, and task intensity, and also the caffeine intake. So through the experiment, I changed one variable at a time, and all the trials are done in my room for data consistency. So first, to see how brightness affects the brain activity, I conducted the 3 trials for dark, moderate, and bright situation. So 4 circular graphs on in the middle. So blue represent calmness, and green represent relaxation, and orange represent the activeness of the brain. And the chart below shows the specific proportion of each brainwaves among little types. And so by looking at data, I noticed that brain is in a calm state in moderate brightness, and which I found a little bit surprising, as I predicted that it usually calms in a dark room than being in the bright room. And here's analysis. So as you can see in the table and bar graph, the proportion of beta wave observing high brightness was 71.1% higher than moderate, and which was 27.4% higher than dark. And the proportion of gamma wave also consistently increases as it gets brighter. So this analysis kind of proves that beta and gamma waves are responsible for cognitive function, and as this matched with our intuition that our productivity is higher during the daytime than nighttime. And then to see how noise and music affect brain activity, I carry out another 3 trials by reading a book in silence, music, and loud noise. And just seen in the circuit graphs, compared to silence, one with music marked high brain relaxation state, and one with loud noise marked high brain activity rate. So since I felt very distracted while reading a book in noise, I suppose that distraction contributes to the high activity proportion. So the data shows that reading with music has 68.4% higher alpha wave than silence, and reading in the noise had 24.7% lower alpha wave than silence. So this makes sense to me, as we generally think that music produces relaxation and comfort, and noise is distracting. But on the other hand, it was kind of counterintuitive that gamma wave, which is responsible for cognitive function, is the highest when I read the book in noise. Although we tend to think that we're the most productive in the silence, based on the experiment and the research, certain types of noise, such as the white noise, might boost your productivity. So the next is task intensity. So for this experiment, I also conducted 3 types of tasks. Reading, which I consider a relatively easy task, and computer science homework, which is active brain engagement and moderate task intensity, and hard workouts, including push-ups, running, and jumping with weight, which I consider a task of very high intensity. So it is interesting that the data shows that I feel more relaxed while doing computer science homework than reading a book. So I made an extra research and figured out that this is because of the specific brain activity called reward system, which is that the brain releases small amount of dopamine while we're actively engaged in tasks, and to make us feel comfortable and stay on task with high concentration. And for high intensity, the activeness is clearly very dominant, and which kind of makes sense again, as during intense exercise, we feel more focused rather than relaxed or calm. And so according to the data table, delta waves for homework are 22.4% lower, and for workout is 95.8% lower than reading. And as opposed to that, gamma wave for intense exercise is no less than 2,473% higher than reading. So this shows as task intensity increases, the brain states shift away from relaxation toward highest alertness and cognitive engagement. So lastly, caffeine intake. So I drank 200 milliliter of coffee, which contained about 80 milligram of caffeine, and waited for about 10 minutes for caffeine to kick in, and then read the book for another 10 minutes. So just as seen, in circuit graphs, brain significantly shifted from calm state to active state after drinking coffee. And this is because the caffeine stimulated my central nervous system and increased the activity rate in my brain. And in fact, as the table shows, after caffeine intake, gamma wave increased by 1,460%, and alpha and theta both decreased by a lot, which clearly explain the zone state that we experienced after drinking coffee. So this is also interesting that the beta wave was increased by 43.8%, and this caused relaxation rate to increase after caffeine intake. So the observation from this experiment is that as brightness increases, the beta and gamma wave increase, and listening to music increases alpha and beta, but decreases delta. And while working in noise increase gamma, but decrease alpha and beta. So this clearly shows that we're able to kind of manipulate our brain waves and brain activity by controlling the independent variables like bright or dark, music or noise, and coffee or water. So using the data and analysis, I did a little bit of coding again. So the code take task and your brain wave, your brainwave proportion as intake, and prints out the possible solution to the current mental state. So, but since I had a very limited size of sample, and I still don't know much about Java language, honestly, so it only takes 4 types of tasks as input, and the output suggestion is kind of simple. But if I get a chance, I would like to take more brainwave sample and expand the scope so that it will apply to more various tasks and situation have more generality. So this is all. And your question, Ms. Ho?
I was wondering when you were talking about the tasks, one of them being reading and one of them being listening to music, did you listen, like when you were reading, did you try reading both in English and both in Japanese? And was there any difference between the two, and same for listening?
So for this experiment, I only read the book written in English because I thought the reading in Japanese is probably way easier than reading in English.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, like,
Mhm.
would it change all the readings?
Yeah, so I feel like it might affect the calmness and the relaxation rate, so I chose to read the book in English. Comment?
With like the circular graphs and like the scores in the middle, are there like certain activities where like the lower score is better, or do you always want like the highest score, which I like the most common?
So it really depends on task intensity and task type. So during, let's say, like meditation or like when you're trying to sleep, you want the gamma and beta waves, which is related to cognitive function, to be lower, as you want delta waves and theta waves to be more dominant in your brain and help you like fall asleep or kind of calm down your like, mental state. You saw what price?
If you can like go back to the trying to read with like different auditory stimulus,
What is it?
like way back. Yeah. So I was wondering if you were tracking like the amount read and like in terms of like the sort of like task, like how much you were trying to read over like what period of time, and were able to track the efficiency that way. Because we can, that I think might give a better picture of what's actually happening, because it's like, okay, you have a lot of extra activity there, but I think most of us can assume that you don't have any data to actually say that when we're having like the high noise in the background, maybe the words per minute that you're reading is going to decrease over time, so you have increased brain activity with a decreased output and like, your work efficiency, and just like perform some sort of numerical analysis in that sense.
Yeah, so I actually thought of that idea, like associating this brainwave analysis to the work efficiency. But I decided to kind of thoroughly focus on comparing the impact that those external factors can have in your brain, rather than how to rather than compare the efficiency of each trial and kind of so if I had time, that would be better, I think. But this is the best I can do this time.
Sorry. How many trials did you do? Like, how many data points did you collect for each?
So I did 2 trials for each, and because EEG device is sometimes kind of random and not accurate, like because it's not like drilling your skull and implant a chip inside your brain, but it just measure brainwave outside your skull. So I need several trials to correct accurate data.
For like the music and the sound, how did you decide like what music specifically you would put on? Because I would think like different genres or like music without lyrics or with lyrics would like affect maybe like your relaxation state.
So the genre I didn't really kind of narrow it down. I just thought like what would happen if I like work in kind of like favorite music, and probably people don't listen to the music that they hate during their work, like while they're working. So I just focus on kind of listening to my favorite song instead of like going between like multiple genre. So not like intense like hardcore music, but not like orchestra music. It just like probably like pop music, like typical pop music. Alright, listen to it.
This is slightly irrelevant, but what genre of book were you reading?
So to take advantage of this experiment time, I read the assigned book, which is no, it was a book from last year, so that was passing. So I found it in my room, and I was kind of forgetting, like I kind of forgot how the story goes. So I picked that book to read to kind of, you know, remember the story at the same time.
I was a little confused with the explanation. Can you explain what the computer coding aspect was? Because I don't remember talking about that class. So what's the goal of the application?
So the goal is to kind of suggest the what's a possible solution, or suggestion that you might have a better productivity for a certain task. So for the example here, so you can choose out of these more. I mean, I can add some more whatsoever. But I chose sleep, and there are these current brainwaves, and then that'll print out the little statement that says increase delta wave and use a dark, quiet environment and avoid flickering. So like before sleeping, you should get in a dark room and quiet environment and avoid flickering. So so let's say I use a lot of if statements, which I currently learned in this whole class. So when let's say alpha and delta are high, says like you're fine and you're like ready to sleep, and when like these are low number for sleeping, so it prints out that use a dark, quiet environment and thing. So it's kind of taking input, which is the certain type of task, and also the specific kind of domination of these brainwaves respectively, and then print out the statement that might help you be productive or help you to actually do that task smoothly.
Okay, so the goal is you pick which task you want, you try to get a live reading where are you now, and it'll spit out what you should do if you want your goals that next task. Okay. Any other questions for Kay? Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. This concludes the Scholars Math presentations, and if you can make any other Scholars presentations this week, I'd encourage you to, but thank you all for coming.